The Nile shimmered under the golden Egyptian sun, its waters gliding past temples whose stone walls bore the names of gods etched for eternity. Priests carried incense through towering colonnades, while in the palace at Memphis, Pharaoh sat beneath gilded images of Ra, supreme among the deities, the very guarantor of life itself. Egypt, in the height of its power, was not merely a kingdom, it was a world believed to rest on divine order, Ma'at, balanced by the gods and guarded by Pharaoh, their earthly son. To question this divine hierarchy was unthinkable, but into this world of certainty came events so shattering, so profound, that they left scars not only on Egypt's memory, but in texts that whisper to us still. New translations of the pyramid texts and the later coffin texts have opened windows into how Egyptians interpreted their cosmos. Gods like Hapi, Osiris, and Ra were not distant abstractions. They were woven into daily survival, in the rise of the Nile, in the fertility of cattle, in the beating of the sun. And so, when the plague struck, a series of catastrophes remembered in Hebrew scriptures and echoed in Egyptian silence, they were not random disasters. They were blows aimed, each one, at the heart of Egypt's divine order. It began with the river. The Nile, venerated as the bloodstream of the god Hapi, sustained Egypt's life for millennia. Each inundation meant crops, bread, and survival. Pyramid inscriptions from as early as 2400 BCE celebrated the Great Flood of Hapi as a gift of the gods. To defile the river was to strike Egypt at its pulse. When the waters turned to blood, as Hebrew texts record, it was more than a natural calamity. It was the undoing of Hapi himself. Priests who once sang hymns to the river god could only watch in horror as the water darkened, fish floated lifeless, and the sacred lifeline of the kingdom reeked of death. A god once praised as Egypt's nourisher had fallen silent. But the Nile's corruption gave way to another terror: frogs. Normally, the frog was a symbol of life, tied to Hecate, goddess of fertility and childbirth. Women carried amulets of her likeness, frog-headed and life-giving. Yet when frogs swarmed every chamber, flooding Pharaoh's palace, filling ovens and beds, the sacred image became grotesque. That which symbolized birth now suffocated the land with deathly abundance. Hecate's promise of renewal was inverted into despair. Then came the dust, rising into gnats, a nuisance that became unbearable. To Egyptians, the ground itself belonged to Geb, god of the earth. Farmers prayed to him for fertile soil, and his stability underpinned Egypt's security. Yet when the very dust of his domain turned against them, Geb's protection seemed stripped away. The priests of Egypt, usually adept in rituals, could not replicate or banish this torment. For the first time, Pharaoh's magicians admitted defeat, whispering, "This is the finger of a greater power." Flies swarmed next, or perhaps beetles, the text is debated, but to Egyptians, insects recalled Khepri, the scarab god who rolled the sun each morning across the sky. He embodied renewal, the daily rebirth of light. Yet the infestation mocked this cycle. Life-giving renewal became unbearable corruption. The scarab, once carved into amulets for eternal protection, became a tormenting presence, a reminder that Egypt's order was unraveling. Then livestock, the pride of Egypt's wealth and faith, began to die. Cattle were not merely animals, but sacred emblems. The bull Apis of Memphis was worshipped in life and mummified in death, while Hathor, the cow-headed goddess, embodied maternal protection. When pestilence killed Egypt's herds, the blow was not economic alone, it was theological. The sacred bulls, once paraded in festivals, lay silent in the dust. Temples that relied on these animals for ritual sacrifices faced emptiness. The gods who watched over Egypt's beasts had been shamed. If livestock fell, so did flesh itself. Boils erupted on Egyptians high and low, priests and peasants alike. Sekhmet, lion-headed goddess of plagues and healing, had long been feared and revered. Hymns to her begged for mercy, for she could send disease but also cure it. But in this moment, she offered no reprieve. Even Imhotep, once mortal and later deified as a god of healing, seemed powerless. The very priesthood that ministered to the sick was itself struck, their skin burning with sores, their rituals broken. The sky, once Egypt's canopy of order, betrayed them next. Hail mingled with fire, battered crops and fields. Egyptians believed Nut arched above them as the sky goddess, while Shu and Tefnut balanced air and moisture. Yet this storm defied all balance. Ancient hymns described Nut as she who protects the earth, but here her embrace turned destructive. Granaries cracked, barley was crushed, and Egypt's proud agricultural system buckled under the assault. And if hail left anything standing, locusts consumed it. These swarms, remembered across history as omens of chaos, struck at the heart of Egypt's stability. Seth, the god of storms, deserts, and disorder, had long been a troubling figure in the pantheon, sometimes protector, often destroyer. But now, even he seemed overwhelmed. The land was stripped bare, crops reduced to nothing. Egypt, once the breadbasket of the ancient world, faced famine and humiliation. Then came perhaps the most profound of all, darkness. For 3 days the sun did not shine. To an Egyptian this was unthinkable. Ra, the sun god, was the mightiest of all, the daily victor over night, chaos, and death. Every dawn was his triumph, every sunset his promise to rise again. To blot out Ra's light was to suggest his defeat. Pyramid texts describe the dead king sailing with Ra across the heavens, assured of rebirth. Yet now even Ra faltered. The land groaned under a darkness that could be felt, a silence that whispered Egypt's gods were falling one by one. And then the final blow. The firstborn of Egypt died, from palace to prison cell. To Egyptians, Pharaoh himself was divine, the son of Ra, the guarantor of cosmic order. His heir carried not just royal blood, but the promise of eternal stability. To lose the firstborn was to rupture the divine chain, to expose Pharaoh's impotence before his people. Even Osiris, lord of death and resurrection, could not shield the royal house. The mourning that rose across Egypt was not simply grief. It was the collapse of belief, the shattering of the divine order Pharaoh was sworn to uphold. In these moments, Egypt's gods, so deeply interwoven into nature, fertility, healing, and kingship, were stripped of their power. Each plague was not only a calamity, but a confrontation, a challenge to the hierarchy that bound Egypt together. Whether remembered as divine miracles or natural catastrophes encoded in myth, the plagues exposed the vulnerability of a civilization that saw itself as eternal. And here lies the unresolved mystery. Were these events, as Hebrew texts claim, deliberate signs meant to dismantle Egypt's gods one by one? Or do newly translated pyramid texts and fragments from later funerary writings hint that Egyptians themselves witnessed natural catastrophes they could not explain, disasters so immense that their silence became their only record? Were the plagues history, myth, or both? A story preserved in the tension between memory and faith. What is certain is this: The Nile's bloodline, the sun's eternal fire, the gods that ruled sky, earth, and death itself, all were shaken. Egypt, the land of eternity, was forced to reckon with mortality. And in that reckoning, history carved a story that still haunts us today. If you found this journey into Egypt's hidden past as compelling as we did, join us again here on History Off the Map. Subscribe for more untold stories, share your thoughts in the comments, and step with us into the places where history and myth meet in shadows.